The morning intrusion. The morning light, pale and buttery, stretched across the worn Persian rug, catching dust motes dancing in the air above John Miller's recliner. At 62, his routine was a finely tuned instrument: first cup of coffee, precisely steeped, then the crisp rustle of the morning paper. Today, the headlines seemed particularly inconsequential, a murmuring backdrop to the quiet comfort of his living room. He adjusted his reading glasses, the scent of brewing coffee mingling with the faint, comforting aroma of old paper and leather. A peaceful, solitary start to the day. A sudden, soft click of the front door latch broke the stillness, followed by the quiet pad of footsteps on the hall tiles. John's brow furrowed slightly. He wasn't expecting anyone. Before he could lower the newspaper, a figure materialized in the doorway, framed by the gentle spill of light. Sarah Jenkins, freshly 18, stood there, a mischievous, almost impish, smile playing on her lips. Her eyes, bright with an uncontainable energy, met his over the top of his spectacles. Without a word, without a moment of hesitation, she crossed the short distance. John watched, bewildered, as she approached, a question forming on his lips but dying before it could be voiced. Then, with an easy, almost feline grace that defied his bewildered expectation, she simply lowered herself onto his lap. John froze. The newspaper, held loosely in his hands, emitted a sharp, protesting crinkle as his grip tightened involuntarily. The world seemed to contract to the space between their two bodies, the unexpected weight of her, the sudden warmth against his legs. He could feel the soft fabric of her jeans, the faint scent of something sweet and youthful, not a perfume, but a natural freshness. His breath hitched. His eyes, wide with shock, locked onto hers. Hers, still sparkling with that knowing mischief, held his gaze for a beat that stretched into an eternity, a quiet, almost flirtatious spark igniting in the silence between them. The age gap, stark and undeniable, only seemed to sharpen the unexpected connection. Then, a bright, unrestrained giggle bubbled up from Sarah, a sound like wind chimes. It broke the spell. She shifted, sliding gracefully off his lap and onto the armrest beside him, her long legs dangling, bare ankles crossed. "Oh, John," she said, her voice light and musical, devoid of any genuine apology, though a hint of amusement lingered. "You always look so serious with your paper. You'd think the world was ending." She leaned back, completely at ease, as if settling onto a stranger's lap was an everyday occurrence. "Don't worry, I'm not here to plunder your sugar bowl this time. Aunt Carol sent me over. She wants to know if you saw her gardening gloves anywhere near your rose bushes yesterday. And, well," she shrugged, a gesture of open, guileless charm, "I often pop over for a chat anyway, don't I? You're such a good listener." John, still somewhat rigid, managed to lower the newspaper, the pages fluttering softly. His heart hammered a confused rhythm against his ribs. He cleared his throat, a dry, raspy sound. "Gardening, gloves," he managed, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. He looked at her, truly looked at her, her lively eyes, the genuine curiosity in her expression now that the initial prank was over. She wasn't malicious, merely, uninhibited. A faint blush crept up his neck. "No, Sarah, I haven't seen any gloves. And you're always welcome, of course, but," he trailed off, gesturing vaguely to the recently vacated space on his lap. Sarah chuckled again, a softer sound this time, sensing his lingering discomfort but not letting it bother her. "Oh, that? Don't mind me. My granddad always used to let me do that when I was little. You just looked so comfortable. Like a big, sturdy old oak." She grinned, a flash of genuine warmth in her eyes. "So, what's in the paper today, Mr. Miller? Anything interesting besides the end of the world?" Her directness, her utter lack of pretense, was disarming. The awkward tension, though still present, began to shift, evolving into something new, a curious, almost bewildered, fascination. Lingering thoughts. John Miller's hands, usually steady as he pruned his rosemary bush, trembled ever so slightly, scattering damp soil onto the patio stones. Hours had passed since the morning's unexpected intrusion, yet the sensation of Sarah's light weight on his lap, the soft brush of her jeans, was stubbornly persistent. He tried to focus on the task, to lose himself in the familiar rhythm of tending to his herbs, but his mind kept looping back to her. Not just her audacious act, but the way her eyes, bright and unapologetic, had held his, and most of all, her smile. It wasn't a polite, practiced curve of the lips, but a genuine, impish grin that had spread across her face, crinkling the corners of her eyes as if she knew a secret only she was privy to. He grunted, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow with the back of his gloved hand. The sun was dipping, painting the sky in hues of orange and deep violet, but the warmth he felt had little to do with the fading day. It was an internal heat, a disquieting warmth that settled in his chest, somewhere between irritation and a nascent, unsettling magnetism. He hadn't felt such an immediate jolt of anything in years. Solitude had been his chosen companion, a quiet, predictable rhythm. Sarah had been a sudden, discordant note, and now, an unbidden replay, her smile a bright, indelible stain on his otherwise placid canvas. He found himself wondering what she was doing, if she was still smiling like that, if he had been merely a momentary diversion in her energetic young life. The thought pricked him, a strange, new sensation. Meanwhile, a few blocks away, Sarah sprawled across her bed, a history textbook open but unread beside her. Her fingers traced patterns on the worn quilt, a faint, contented hum escaping her lips. She replayed the morning's encounter, not with John's bewildered internal monologue, but with a mischievous delight. The way his paper had crinkled, his eyes widening, the utter stillness of him. Most amusing, though, was the faint blush that had crept up his neck, dusting his cheeks with a soft, surprising pink. It wasn't anger she'd seen, but a peculiar mix of shock and something else, a flicker of vulnerability, perhaps. Pink, she whispered to the ceiling, a smile playing on her own lips. It was an unexpected detail, a chink in the armor of his quiet, ordered existence. She'd expected a scowl, a stern word, maybe even a flustered retreat. But the blush, it spoke of an unexamined corner of his personality, a little secret. It wasn't a challenge she'd set out to find, but now that she had, it intrigued her. What was behind that sudden flush? Was he really as unreadable as he presented himself? The thought sparked a fresh wave of curiosity, a desire to understand the quiet man who clearly wasn't as quiet on the inside as he seemed. As twilight deepened, settling a soft blue over the neighborhood, both John and Sarah found themselves staring into the middle distance, lost in separate, yet strangely convergent, thoughts. A new, unspoken thread had been spun between them that morning, delicate but undeniably present. It wasn't a thread of shared experience, but of unexpected impact, a mutual stirring of curiosity. John, usually so self-contained, felt a tug he couldn't name, a desire to understand the bright, uninhibited girl who had so effortlessly disarmed him. And Sarah, whose world was a whirlwind of new experiences, found herself drawn to shared moments. The scent of warm chocolate chip cookies, still faintly steaming, became a new fixture in John's mornings. Sarah would appear at the porch, a small plate in hand, her smile a bright, uninhibited thing. "Thought you might like these," she'd say, not waiting for an invitation, just setting them on the small table beside his recliner before heading off to her own daily pursuits. He found himself, over the next few days, anticipating the small, sugary ritual, a faint warmth spreading through him that had nothing to do with the morning sun. His usual solitude, once a comfortable shroud, now felt interrupted, yet not unwelcome. One afternoon, as John was meticulously pruning a rose bush, a shadow fell across his hands. He looked up to find Sarah perched on the edge of the stone birdbath, closer than he'd expected. Her denim shorts, faded and soft, rode high on her thighs, and her bare feet dangled just above the water. "Your garden is beautiful," she observed, her voice low and genuine. "I tried planting a few things last year, but they all just sort of wilted." She gestured vaguely. He found himself explaining the nuances of soil pH and the benefits of proper drainage, a topic he rarely discussed with anyone. She listened intently, her head tilted, occasionally interjecting with a question that showed she was truly engaged, not just making polite conversation. The air between them, usually charged with a quiet, unspoken tension, now felt lighter, almost companionable. He noticed the smudges of dirt on her knee, the way a stray strand of hair fell across her forehead, and a strange, disquieting curiosity stirred within him. Later that week, a gust of wind tore through the valley, leaving a trail of minor havoc. John discovered his sturdy wooden bird feeder, a gift from his late wife, lying shattered near the oak tree. He sighed, assessing the splintered wood, when Sarah materialized beside him, a small toolbox in her hand. "Looks like it took a beating," she remarked, kneeling beside the wreckage. "Think we can fix it?" He hadn't considered it, but her enthusiasm was infectious. Together, they sorted through the pieces, her nimble fingers surprisingly adept at holding small screws while he carefully reassembled the frame. She made light-hearted jokes about his surgical precision and his carpentry prowess, her laughter a bright, clear sound that echoed through the otherwise quiet afternoon. At one point, as they both reached for a fallen piece of wood, their hands brushed. A jolt, brief but undeniable, passed between them. John drew back, a familiar disquiet settling in, but Sarah merely grinned, a touch of mischief in her eyes. "Teamwork makes the dream work, right?" she quipped, her gaze holding his for a moment longer than necessary. By the time the feeder was rehung, a little lopsided but undeniably functional, a comfortable ease had settled between them. The old, familiar boundaries that had once defined John's existence seemed to have blurred, softened by shared tasks and unexpected laughter. He found himself looking forward to these moments, to the way Sarah disrupted his quiet world, and that realization, more than anything, unsettled him. A comforting presence. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the faint, sweet perfume Sarah wore. John, still slightly rigid from her unexpected landing, felt a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the ceramic mug in his hand. It was a novel sensation, a gentle thrumming beneath his ribs that resonated with the youthful energy radiating from her. He hadn't realized how long it had been since he'd felt anything beyond the quiet hum of solitude. The newspaper, a forgotten barrier, remained clutched in his hands, its crinkling a soft counterpoint to the rapid beat of his own heart. Their eyes, still locked, held a silent conversation, a curious dance between his surprised caution and her unabashed amusement. "Comfier than the armchair, wouldn't you say?" Sarah's voice, a playful lilt, finally broke the spell, though her gaze remained steady, a hint of challenge in its depths. John managed a gruff, "You're audacious." He didn't push her off, a fact that surprised him more than it seemed to surprise her. A faint blush crept up his neck, a telltale sign of his discomposure. From that morning on, a subtle shift occurred in their unspoken routine. Sarah, with her boundless energy and unburdened spirit, continued to orbit John's quiet world. She no longer landed in his lap, but her presence was a constant, a bright spark that chased away the lingering shadows of his solitary existence. She'd bring him a second cup of coffee, often with a mischievous comment about his old man habits, or simply sit on the armrest of his recliner, narrating anecdotes from her day with a captivating animation. Sarah, too, found herself increasingly drawn to their shared moments. The initial thrill of teasing John had blossomed into something softer, a genuine affection for his quiet strength and the unexpected glimmers of warmth she'd unearthed beneath his gruff exterior. She'd catch herself looking at the clock, a faint smile playing on her lips, knowing he'd be home soon. There was a comforting rhythm to their interactions, a sense of belonging she hadn't realized she craved. His reactions, from his initial shocked silence to his slowly softening gaze, were a source of endless fascination. Meanwhile, John found himself performing the most un-John-like activity, watching. He'd finish his afternoon walk, a ritual he'd followed for decades, and instead of heading straight inside, he'd linger by the window. His gaze would drift down the lane, scanning for the familiar glint of her car, a specific dent in the passenger door, the way it always parked slightly crooked. A subtle flutter, like the wings of a trapped bird, would stir in his chest when he finally spotted it. He'd pretend to be absorbed in a book or the newspaper when she entered, but the corner of his eye would track her movements, the sound of her footsteps a welcome intrusion into the quiet of his home. He even found himself tidying up, a small, unconscious effort to make the space more inviting for her arrival. It was an unsettling, yet undeniably exhilarating, shift in his carefully constructed world. This new anticipation, this subtle pull, was a current he hadn't felt in years, a quiet tremor that promised something more than just comfortable routine. Whispers on the breeze. The morning sun, usually a comforting blanket, felt like an intrusive spotlight as John sat on his porch swing. Sarah, still buzzing with the effervescence of youth, had just scampered off, her laughter echoing down the street like wind chimes in a gale. He was still smiling, a soft, unbidden curve to his lips, when a slight movement across the way caught his eye. Mrs. Gable, a woman whose life seemed to revolve around the comings and goings of her neighbors, stood on her own porch, a watering can clutched in her hand. Her gaze, however, was not on her petunias. It was fixed squarely on John's house, and specifically, on the empty space beside him where Sarah had just been. A prickle of unease snaked its way up John's spine. He offered a small, polite nod, but Mrs. Gable merely tilted her head, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. It wasn't an overtly hostile look, but it was laden with a heavy, unspoken curiosity, a question mark hanging in the air between their two houses. He could practically feel the gears turning in her mind, cataloging, judging, forming an opinion. He watched as she finally turned to tend to her flowers, but not before casting one last, lingering glance in his direction. The image of her raised eyebrow, the faint purse of her lips, replayed in his mind. The smile that had graced his face moments before evaporated, replaced by a vague sense of disquiet. Suddenly, the easy camaraderie he shared with Sarah, the light-hearted banter, the innocent touches, felt different. Exposed. He remembered the way she'd playfully snatched his newspaper that morning, the warmth of her arm brushing his as she'd leaned in to whisper a joke, the unrestrained joy in her eyes as he'd chuckled. In the privacy of his own home, those moments had been simple, natural. Under Mrs. Gable's scrutiny, they transformed into something else entirely, something potentially scandalous. A flush crept up John's neck. He felt like a boy caught with his hand in the cookie jar, a ridiculous notion for a man his age. What would people think? What could they think, seeing an 18-year-old girl practically living in the house of a 62-year-old bachelor? The age gap, which had felt inconsequential in the bubble of their shared moments, now loomed large, a glaring disparity. He stood up, the swing creaking in protest. The air, which had been warm and pleasant just moments before, now felt thin, charged with unspoken accusations. He realized with a jolt that his carefully constructed world of quiet solitude, a world where he answered to no one but himself, was no longer inviolable. Sarah, in her innocent exuberance, had unwittingly poked holes in its carefully maintained facade. And Mrs. Gable, with her single, silent look, had poured in a dose of cold, societal judgment. He ran a hand through his hair, a confused sigh escaping his lips. He felt silly, foolish even, to let a neighbor's gaze disarm him so completely. But the feeling persisted, a dull throb of anxiety beneath his ribs. The easy, unburdened laughter of the morning seemed a distant memory, replaced by the whispering breeze carrying the weight of unspoken concerns. The world, it seemed, was watching. And John, for the first time in a long time, was acutely aware of its gaze. Inner turmoil. Sarah hummed softly, a bright, tuneless sound as she walked away from John's house, the scent of his Earl Grey still clinging faintly to her clothes. A smile played on her lips, a genuine, unburdened expression that felt strangely liberating. She liked being around him, liked the way his eyebrows furrowed in mock irritation when she rearranged his meticulously ordered bookshelves, or the quiet, almost imperceptible chuckle that escaped him when she recounted a particularly outrageous anecdote from her day. It was fun. More than fun, it was a comfort, a peculiar sense of belonging she hadn't anticipated. Yet, a tiny, persistent question nagged at the edges of her contentment. Why him? Why this grumpy, endearing old man who, by all accounts, should have nothing in common with an 18-year-old girl? Was it okay, this unusual friendship that felt so right and yet so undeniably strange? The thought flickered, a momentary shadow, before she shrugged it off, attributing it to the general oddness of life. Miles away, John sat in his armchair, the unread newspaper lying discarded beside him. The hum of the refrigerator seemed unnaturally loud in the silence Sarah had left behind. Her presence, a vibrant, chaotic splash of color in his monochrome existence, was both exhilarating and deeply unsettling. He found himself anticipating her arrival, a subtle quickening of his pulse, a readiness he hadn't experienced in decades. But then the questions would descend, a relentless tide of self-doubt and confusion. What was she doing here? Why was she spending her precious, youthful hours with him, a man whose life was largely lived in retrospect? The age gap, once a comfortable barrier, now felt like an abyss, a chasm that both intrigued and terrified him. He was disarmed by her easy charm, disquieted by the way she effortlessly dismantled his carefully constructed solitude. The anxiety tightened its grip, a knot forming in his stomach. He found himself replaying their conversations, scrutinizing her gestures, searching for an explanation, a logical reason for this burgeoning connection. It was an unsettling magnetism, a pull he couldn't ignore, but also couldn't quite comprehend. He needed to understand, to put words to the unspoken dynamic that had taken root between them. One cool evening, as the last vestiges of twilight faded from the sky and Sarah was gathering her things to leave, John cleared his throat, the sound rough in the quiet room. "Sarah," he began, his voice softer than usual, a vulnerability he rarely displayed. She paused, her hand on the doorknob, turning to face him, her expression open and curious. He met her gaze, his own filled with a mixture of apprehension and genuine inquiry. Why do you like spending so much time with an old man like me?" The question hung in the air, unexpected and direct. Sarah's playful smile faltered, her brow furrowing slightly as she considered his words. The easy confidence that usually defined her wavered, replaced by a momentary, thoughtful stillness. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, the complexities of their connection seemed to settle upon her, a quiet weight in the fading light. A quiet absence. The sparkle in Sarah's eyes dimmed, replaced by a contemplative stillness John found unsettling. His question, an inquiry into her deepest desires regarding him, hung between them, an invisible, shimmering partition. A subtle stiffening in her posture, a slight retraction of her shoulders, signaled a retreat he hadn't foreseen. Then, without a sound, she rose from his lap, the sudden lightness on his thighs leaving a surprising emptiness, and glided from the living room. The next morning, the usual vibrant chaos that announced Sarah's presence was strikingly absent. No playful barb about his newspaper, no audacious claim on his armchair, no light, teasing touch as she passed. The quiet felt amplified. John caught himself listening, for her footsteps, for the familiar creak of floorboards under her energetic stride, for the distinctive hum she sometimes made while engaged in mundane tasks. Only the refrigerator's soft thrum and the rustle of his own turning pages broke the stillness. Days blurred, each marked by Sarah's uncharacteristic reserve. She remained in the house, a fleeting shadow at the edge of his vision, but the vital spark that typically animated her, particularly around him, had receded. Meals passed with polite, almost formal conversation. Her eyes, usually so direct and challenging, now held a veiled quality, avoiding his for long stretches. The mischievous glint had vanished, replaced by an unfamiliar introspection. John, accustomed to a life of measured solitude, felt disoriented. This quiet absence wasn't merely a lack of sound, it was a profound void. He realized, with a jolt that resonated deeper than expected, how much he had come to anticipate her presence, to brace himself for her playful intrusions, even, he admitted reluctantly, to crave the electric tension that crackled between them. Her audacious charm, her uninhibited candor, had become a strange, magnetic pull in his otherwise predictable existence. He missed the way her laughter echoed through the rooms, a sound so rich and unburdened. He missed the unexpected touch of her hand on his arm, the fleeting brush of her hair against his cheek as she leaned in to whisper a secret, the way she would sometimes simply sit and watch him, a silent, almost possessive intensity in her gaze. These small, seemingly insignificant moments had woven themselves into the fabric of his daily routine, becoming threads he hadn't recognized he needed until they were suddenly drawn taut, threatening to unravel. The house, once comfortably spacious, now seemed cavernous, the silence amplifying his own thoughts. He found himself replaying their last exchange, her sudden quietude, his direct question. Had he pushed too hard? Had he misinterpreted her playful advances, reading too much into youthful effervescence? The idea that he might have inadvertently chased away the most vibrant thing to enter his life in years settled in his chest, a leaden weight. He had grown accustomed to the delightful disruption she brought, the way she made him feel, for the first time in a long time, truly seen, truly alive. And now, in her quiet absence, he understood just how much he had come to value it. The heart's true answer. The morning light, usually a herald of bustling activity in the small cottage, seemed to cast a somber glow on John as Sarah entered the kitchen. He sat at the worn wooden table, a half-eaten piece of toast forgotten beside his coffee, his gaze lost somewhere beyond the window, his shoulders slumped in an uncharacteristic display of melancholy. The usual spark of curiosity that lit his eyes when Sarah burst in was absent, replaced by a quiet, almost defeated expression. "Everything all right, John?" she asked, her voice softer than usual, the playful lilt muted by genuine concern. She pulled out the chair opposite him, sitting down and leaning forward, her chin resting on her clasped hands. He startled slightly, as if waking from a deep thought, and offered a weak smile. "Just thinking," he murmured, picking at a loose thread on his sleeve. The air was thick with unspoken words, a rare silence between them that felt heavier than any boisterous argument. Sarah, usually quick to quip or tease, found herself searching for the right words, a gentle hand reaching out across the divide of their ages and experiences. "You know, John," she began, her voice gaining a little more strength, "you're really the best listener I've ever had. With anyone else, I feel like I have to filter myself, to make sure I don't sound silly. But with you," she paused, meeting his gaze directly, a disarming honesty shining in her bright eyes. "With you, I feel important. Like what I have to say actually matters, even if it's just about a silly dream or a new idea for a painting." A faint smile, genuine this time, touched John's lips, chasing away some of the shadows from his face. He watched her, truly seeing her, and in her open, uninhibited expression, he saw not the young woman who had once perched playfully on his lap, but a kind, trusted friend. The unsettling magnetism that had confused him, the quiet, flirty tension that had sparked between them, began to dissipate, replaced by a warm, comforting understanding. He recognized the pure, platonic affection in her words, a bond forged in shared laughter and quiet confessions, utterly devoid of the romantic undercurrents he had, perhaps foolishly, imagined. "You make me feel important, not silly," she reiterated softly, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. It was a gentle clarification, a brave acknowledgement of the unspoken, and a true answer to the heart's quiet question. A profound sense of relief washed over John, loosening the tight knot in his chest. The misinterpretations, the unspoken assumptions, all dissolved in the clarity of her words. He reached across the table, covering her hands with his own, a gesture of profound gratitude. "Sarah," he said, his voice a little hoarse with emotion, "I value our talks more than you know. You bring a light into my life that I didn't even realize was missing. You make me feel young again, in the best possible way. A kind of freshness, a connection that's truly special." He squeezed her hands gently, his smile now full and bright. "Thank you for that. For everything." The morning light, now fully streaming into the room, seemed to sparkle around them, illuminating a newfound clarity and a deeper, more honest connection between two souls who had, for a moment, simply needed to speak their hearts. A garden of friendship. The morning sun, usually a quiet companion to John's first coffee, felt different today. It illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air, but also, in his mind's eye, the playful glint in Sarah's eyes from yesterday. The unexpected intimacy of her on his lap, the strange, electric hum that had filled the air, it hadn't been romantic, not in the way the world understood it. It had been something else. A recognition, perhaps, of a unique frequency they both vibrated on. He found himself chuckling softly, the newspaper lying unread. It was a friendship, he realized, but one forged in an unusual crucible, a bond untainted by the usual expectations. A deep, quiet respect had settled in his chest, surprising him with its warmth. A knock at the screen door startled him from his reverie. Sarah, a wide smile already blooming, held a potted plant aloft. Its leaves were a vibrant, almost iridescent green, tiny white flowers peeking shyly from the foliage. "Morning, John," she chirped, pushing the door open without waiting for an invitation. "Thought your garden could use a little more pizzazz." He watched her, a knot of something easing in his chest. "Pizzazz, you say?" he responded, a smile touching his lips. "What is it?" "It's a moonflower," she declared, holding it out to him. "They only open at night. Thought it'd be a good addition for your evening strolls." She then gestured towards the porch swing. "Come on, let's plant it after we talk." He set his coffee cup down, a lightness in his step as he followed her. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and blossoming honeysuckle. They settled onto the swing, its gentle creak a rhythmic counterpoint to the chirping sparrows. "About yesterday," Sarah began, her voice softer than usual, her gaze direct. "It wasn't weird, was it?" John looked at her, truly looked at her. Her youthful exuberance was still there, but beneath it, a surprising depth. "No, Sarah," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "It wasn't weird. It was honest. And clear. A friendship, pure and simple, but not simple at all." Sarah's smile returned, broader this time, a genuine relief washing over her face. "Good. Because I felt it too. Like we just understood something without needing to say it." She leaned back against the swing's chains, her eyes scanning his meticulously kept garden. "This place is special, John. And so are you." They sat there for a long time, the silence comfortable, punctuated only by the distant caw of a crow and the rhythmic sway of the swing. Sarah recounted tales of her childhood in the city, the chaos and the small moments of joy, while John found himself sharing anecdotes of his own life, stories he hadn't spoken aloud in years. He spoke of his late wife, not with a mournful sigh, but with a gentle fondness that surprised even him. He described the challenges of building his garden from scratch, the satisfaction of watching something flourish under his care. The moonflower sat between them, a silent testament to a new, shared tradition. A new beginning, blossoming in the quiet sanctuary of John's garden, nurtured by the unexpected warmth of an unusual friendship. The tension that had once hummed between them had dissolved, replaced by a deep, resonant chord of understanding and mutual respect. The magnetism was still there, a unique draw, but now it felt like the steady pull of shared ground, a comforting anchor rather than a disquieting current.